This is a bank robbery. Everybody get down. You've got 60 seconds to get me a car, the cash, and a clear way out, or I will pull the trigger.
It seems like you're under a lot of pressure right now.
Don't play games with me. Time's ticking. 55 seconds.
Help me understand, Frank. How does pulling the trigger get you what you want?
They'll know I'm serious. No stalling.
It sounds like you don't want to do this, Frank. You just want to make sure you're not ignored.
Damn right I don't. 40 seconds.
How do I make sure you don't walk out of here in cuffs, Frank?
I told you, car, money, safe passage.
You don't trust that I'll help you get out of this alive.
No one ever does.
Then let's fix that. But first, let David go. Show me I can trust you too.
Why would I do that? You got 25 seconds left.
Because right now you have leverage. You're in control. If David gets hurt, things spiral out of control. SWAT moves in, and you lose all your options.
But if I let him go, I get nothing.
What do you really need most right now, Frank? More hostages or more time to figure this out?
Time.
Then let David go. Show them you're thinking, that you're negotiating, not just reacting. It buys you time, real time.
Go. Before I change my mind.
Good call, Frank. Now let's talk about what happens next. On your terms.
That was intense, right? But did you catch the tactics John used? This wasn't just luck. Every move was carefully planned to get the best possible outcome. In high-stakes situations like this, negotiation isn't about brute force or making demands. It's about control, psychology, and guiding the conversation in the right direction. Let's break down exactly how John did that. Section 1. Tactical empathy. John didn't start with commands, threats, or demands. Instead, his first move was tactical empathy. He said, "It seems like you're under a lot of pressure." Now, why did he do that? When people are in crisis, they're not thinking logically. Their brains are flooded with stress, emotions, and fear. The more pressure they feel, the more unpredictable they become. John's goal wasn't to calm Frank down immediately. It was to acknowledge his emotions so that Frank felt heard. This reduced the chance of immediate violence and made Frank more open to conversation. This works in everyday life too. Let's say you're dealing with an angry customer. Instead of saying, "calm down," which often makes things worse, try, "It sounds like this situation has been really frustrating for you." That simple shift builds trust and lowers defensiveness. Section 2. Calibrated questions, shifting the focus. Next, John didn't argue with Frank's demands. He didn't say no outright. Instead, he used a powerful tool called a calibrated question. How does pulling the trigger get you what you want? Why is this so effective? Because it forces Frank to stop and think. His brain has to switch from reacting emotionally to processing the situation logically. Instead of feeling backed into a corner, he's now considering his options. Calibrated questions are powerful because they avoid direct confrontation. If John had said, "You don't want to do this," Frank might have doubled down just to prove a point. But by asking a question, John shifted the focus onto Frank's decision-making process. You can use this tactic in business negotiations too. Instead of saying, "This price is too high," try, "How am I supposed to justify this price to my team?" The other side now has to justify their position, and suddenly you have the upper hand. Section 3. Labeling and mirroring, controlling the emotional climate. At one point, Frank said, "No one ever does." He was referring to trust. He didn't believe that John or anyone else would actually help him. Instead of arguing, John used labeling. "You don't trust that I'll help you get out of this alive." By saying this, John wasn't just repeating Frank's words. He was showing that he understood Frank's fears. This is key because when people feel understood, they're more likely to engage in rational conversation. It also gives them a chance to correct you, which can reveal even more useful information. Another technique John could have used here is mirroring, repeating key words from what Frank said, like, "No one ever does." This simple repetition encourages the other person to elaborate, often giving away critical details. These techniques are useful in any negotiation. If a client says, "We just don't have the budget for this," you can label their concern, "It sounds like you're under a lot of budget pressure right now." Or you can mirror, "The budget?" This keeps them talking and helps you uncover new ways to negotiate. Section 4. The power of no, avoiding ultimatums. Frank demanded a car, money, and safe passage. A typical mistake in negotiation would be to say a hard no or "we can't do that." But John avoided direct rejection. Instead, he said, "One step at a time, Frank." This is important because a hard no can feel like a dead end, triggering frustration or aggression. Instead, John kept the conversation going by breaking things down into manageable steps. The longer Frank talked, the more time John had to steer the situation in the right direction. In real life, this works in salary negotiations. If a job offer is too low, don't just say, "I can't accept that." Instead, ask, "How can we get closer to something that reflects my experience?" This keeps the door open for discussion. Section 5. Logical reframing. Turning emotion into strategy. Frank was emotional, but John knew he needed to think rationally, so he used logical reframing. He said, if David gets hurt, things spiral out of control. This forced Frank to look at the bigger picture. Negotiation isn't about winning arguments. It's about helping the other person see a reality they might be missing. In hostage situations, emotions run high, but reframing helps shift focus back to practical consequences. You can use this in negotiations where someone is stuck on a bad decision. Instead of saying, "that won't work," reframe it. "If we go that route, how do we handle the risks?" This gets them to consider alternatives without feeling like they're being pushed. Section 6. Applying these tactics in everyday life. These strategies aren't just for hostage negotiators. They work in business, salary negotiations, and even personal relationships. Let's say you're negotiating rent. Instead of saying, "that's too expensive," try a calibrated question. "How am I supposed to afford this?" Or imagine you're at a car dealership. Instead of saying, "that's too much," say, "it sounds like this is your best offer." That small change makes the salesperson feel like they need to justify their price, or maybe even lower it. Section 7. Final takeaways. Negotiation isn't about overpowering the other person. It's about guiding the conversation, making them feel understood, and steering toward the best possible outcome. Master tactical empathy, labeling, and calibrated questions, and you'll be a more effective negotiator in any situation.